Greetings and welcome to Next Stop Your Career. We are excited to be here today representing Southern Nevada's local workforce development system. And we're here today to talk a little bit about the disconnected youth that we have seen in our area and some of the initiatives that are taking place in our area to address it. I'm really excited to get to the content here, and I don't want to spend too much time. So let's go through a couple of quick introductions, and then we will get right into the heart of this thing. Sitting to my left, I'd like to first introduce our Chief Programs Officer for Workforce Connections, which is Southern Nevada's local workforce development board, Dr. Ricardo Villalobos. He oversees implementation of the WIOA Title I programs for our area for 4 Southern Nevada counties, as well as overseeing other initiatives. He is also my boss, so I'm trying to look good here, but please welcome Dr. Ricardo Villalobos. To his left is Dr. Tiffany Tyler, representing the city of Las Vegas, and she has a lengthy resume that we do not have time to go through all of the wonderful things she's done today. But just so you know, she does head up workforce development initiatives for the city. She was formerly the head of the Nevada Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation, which is Nevada's state workforce agency. And she is a published researcher and a local icon for how to partner better, I would say. So once again, please welcome Dr. Tiffany Tyler. And then to her left is Cecil Fielder, who is a strategic initiatives manager at Workforce Connections also. And he has spent 30 years in the transportation industry, including being the director of transportation safety training and security for AGM. And he was a member of the governor's workforce development board. And he was a member of our local workforce development board. And when he was ready to transition into a new role, we stole him because we couldn't let him go. So now he is working with us on the local board staff. Please welcome Cecil Fielder. And once again, welcome to all 3 of you. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation about disrupting the disconnected youth pipeline.
Thank you, Malik.
I am Malik M.L. Williams, a project coordinator at Workforce Connections, and I am very happy to be your host and moderator for this panel discussion. So let's get into it. Before we start the conversation, let's have a little context here. We are talking about disconnected youth, and many of you may know this as the term opportunity youth, but when we say disconnected youth, we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about 16 to 24-year-olds who are not engaged in education or employment. And this work in our area got started with some national data taken from a 2023 Measure of America report. It looked at the most populous metropolitan statistical areas in America and provided some data on the disconnected youth, as they termed it, in those areas. And in case you didn't know, nationally, there are about 38.8 million young adults 16 to 24 years old. And of that, over 4 million were classified as disconnected youth. So here's a question for you to ponder as you're watching this from wherever you are. Do you know what percentage of the youth in your area would be classified as disconnected youth? And I want you to just think about that for a minute. And it's okay if you don't know, because actually that's part of the story about how things got started here. But just to call out a couple of examples of areas that were cited in the report, Bakersfield, California, for example, 18.3% of youth classified as disconnected youth. Of note, 20.5% of young men were considered disconnected, and 28.2% of young adults who are white were classified as disconnected in Bakersfield, California. One more example in Memphis, Tennessee. In Memphis, 19.9, almost 20% of youth classified as disconnected, not in school or working. And there, of note, 23.5% of young men and 27.3% of Black young adults classified as disconnected. So that's some of the background that we're looking at and that informed the work that led us to this journey. So let's talk about the journey for a minute, and let's talk to our panelists. Dr. Villalobos, or Dr. V as I like to call him. How did this whole Disconnected Youth Initiative get started in Southern Nevada?
Yeah, thank you, Malik, and appreciate this opportunity. And I appreciate you setting the context, because that's exactly what came before me, was the question of how many disconnected youth do I believe exist in Southern Nevada? And to be honest with you, Malik, I had no idea. I was unaware, unsure, so I took a wild guess. I forget the exact number I mentioned. And it was Robert Sines, a mentor, a champion of youth across the country for disconnected youth, who presented me with that data. He said, Ricardo, there's 42,500 disconnected youth. As you mentioned, 16 to 24-year-olds of young men and women who are not working and not in school. And like the way this thing started, we're gonna share our journey today. We're gonna talk about that today. It started with that very question. And to say that I was convicted, embarrassed, ashamed, as someone who, proposes to be a champion of our youth and not be aware of what that was shocking. And so I was incredibly convicted about the fact that here in Southern Nevada, we have 42,500, representing 17.2% of disconnected youth. And so with that awareness, I had to make a decision. What am I going to do? Am I going to just keep doing what I do day to day, or am I going to really let that conviction set in and do something about it? So it really, that spark set a fire in my bones, to say it the least. And so what I decided to do, the very first thing I decided to do, was reach out to someone who I consider a champion in this space for youth. Has a tremendous personal story. I've known Tiffany, I think, 15 plus years. And we've talked about youth to some degree or another for over 15 years. She was the first person that came to mind when I thought about, our situation here locally. I reached out to Tiffany, took the same approach. Do you know how many exist? She was unaware. She was just as convicted. And the conversation turned into, we need to do something about it, and we need to do something now. So that was the impetus behind getting started on our journey, Malik.
And Dr. Tyler-Garner, I understand you kind of had maybe some personal motivation to really get involved into this work.
Yes, as a non-traditional student myself who dropped out of high school in the wake of a violent assault years ago and did not return until after I had my first son, and only at the behest of a local adult high school counselor, I was moved to action, and from a few places. One, I thought about the loss of opportunity, and not just the loss of opportunity for the youth that were experiencing the disconnection, but also the loss for our economy and our employers. And so as we began to even unpack the data, some of the things that were most startling for me is the who and why. And so you would typically think, they've just left school early, or maybe high school wasn't the place for them. We discovered when we unpacked our data that nearly 60% of the individuals experiencing disconnection were individuals that had already graduated from high school, literally sitting on the sidelines of life with no one supporting them to get into the game. What a missed opportunity for us. Also, as a result of some other hats that I wear in the work, was personally aware of the fact that there are segments of our community that are experiencing unemployment at a rate of 29%. The rate that unemployment was during the Great Depression. And so think about the missed opportunities. So I am, while troubled by that data, glad that Dr. V saw it and was moved to action. For me, that is the essence of what we call data-driven practice. And so I'm not only excited about the possibilities, but mindful that there's a moral imperative underway. One that says that if we are to realize anything, whether it's the economy we want, the quality of life that we want, or for these young people to realize their potential, that much more work must be done and done together.
All right. Well,
Awesome.
Mr. Fielder, we heard Dr. V and Dr. Tiffany talk a little bit about what brought them to this work. Can you talk a little bit, not just about how you got involved, but how you're moving from problem towards solution in this work?
Yeah, so for me, when Dr. Villalobos and Dr. Tyler-Garner began to unpack not only the data, but also outlining the canvas, I saw myself in the canvas. As a disconnected youth myself, I think I checked all the box between 16 and 24. My father was sentenced to 50 years. When I was 24 years old, 6 months later, my mom was shot and killed. I was a high school dad, a high school dropout. And so when they began to tell me the narrative of what was going on here locally in Southern Nevada, 42,000 disconnected youth, I immediately saw myself in the canvas. And for me, when I came alongside both of these individuals, spring of 2023, luckily for me, they had an action plan, a 6-page document that not only outlined the mission and the vision of this work, but also the strategic priorities, the goals, and the outcomes that they were looking for. A rather ambitious goal, I must say. They wanted to disrupt the pipeline by engaging 21,000 of the 42,000 in just the first 5 years.
So half.
And so for me, that was my motive to really fully immerse myself in this work and begin galvanizing and driving this work forward.
Mm. And talk a little bit about how things started and where you are now, because I know this initiative started small with just a few conversations, and it's grown a little bit since then.
October of 2022, fall of 22, they had their first disconnected youth convening, approximately 5 people in the room. Their second convening, somewhere around 10 people in the room. When I came along spring of 23, about 18 months ago, we're talking 12 to 14 people in the room. Fast forward today, these leaders have attracted more than 60 individuals in the room, 30 plus community partners. We are tearing down the silos in our community, and we are doing this work together. It is a we thing.
That's right.
All right. So I love it. It's a we thing. Dr. V, can you talk a little bit more about that? What drives this sustained engagement and growth?
Yeah, Malik, I'll start by saying these two individuals, Cecil and Tiffany, represent the partners that we have at the table. I mean, people who come together out of conviction, out of passion, out of commitment to do something. And, as Cecil had shared, we started early with just a few, and then now it's grown, Cecil mentioned. And one of the things that we, from the onset, wanted to put out there as we were, inviting people to the table, to the potluck, right, was bring something to the potluck. Bring something. You can take a goodie bag to go, but we wanted it to be something where people didn't come to take, because sometimes, a local workforce development board, as a convener of the WIOA system, as an administrator of WIOA Title I funds, can be viewed as a giver. And that was not the intent behind convening partners coming together. The intent was, if you're in the space that's of service to youth, come and join us. And we laid it out very clearly from the beginning that this is a we thing. Meaning, what does that mean? That means there's no finger pointing here. There's no blame shifting here. It's not the school district's fault. It's not juvenile justice system's fault. It's not, this community-based organization's fault. It's not the board's fault. Like, no blaming, no finger pointing. We're in this together. And as Cecil mentioned, and I'm sure it's not unique to our local area, but silos happen. And we recognize that there's a lot of great work already happening in pockets, right? But we weren't building a narrative together. And in some cases, we're competing with each other over the same funds to do the same thing. And how much more powerful and radical would it be to say, hey, instead of competing with each other, let's come together.
That's right.
Let's come together and do something. And so really our tagline is, it's a we thing. We are in this together. We are doing it together. We are moving forward together. We are making impact together. And so again, it's a collective impact, with people that again, Cecil and Dr. Tyler represent the heart of the people that come to this coalition. It is really grassroots. It is passion. And I mean, I can go on, but I mean, you want to see it, just look at these two individuals. And that's what it means to be a we thing.
I love hearing about all the wonderful engagement that you all have brought to the table and the energy. Cecil, can you talk a little bit about what keeps it rolling? How do you maintain that energy? How do you keep people engaged?
Sure. So for me personally, I'm a galvanizer, right? My focus is to listen to everyone's agenda. Oftentimes in business, we draw lines in the sand, public, private, nonprofit, faith-based, we draw lines in the sand. My job is to blur the lines and to get all of us to work together. And so I'm hyper-focused not only on hearing voices of those coming to the table, but we've also put the youth at the center of the table. It's important for us to listen to what they have to say, better understand the way they think. And as we develop the strategies in this work from an operational standpoint, they are at the center of the table helping us with the design.
Absolutely. I think it's also important to know that as a part of this we thing, it's a commitment to shared vision, shared accountability, and sustainability, where we will be intentional about how we coordinate, communicate, and decision make together as a part of the work. And so Dr. V noted that it's a real potluck, and that we are, as Cecil noted, centering the youth in the work. As a part of that centering in ways that bring everyone together, there's intention around how we will effectively work together, whether it's the committing to reduce it by 50%, or the ways in which we're saying we know that there are others that should be at this table. It's the intention around not just doing things to people, but with them, including our youth. It's a part of the work.
Dr. Tyler-Garner, too, I'd like to highlight, we've been intentional, too, to go back to that blueprint, right? I talked about the action plan that we'll share with the audience. But that is our North Star. It keeps us focused. It doesn't allow shiny objects to come in. And we keep the focus on engaging the youth, 16 to 24, back into education, training, and career opportunities. That is at the heart of what we're doing. And so we constantly assess. We're constantly looking at ourselves. How do we get better? Are we taking a qualitative approach to this work? And so that has been key for us, is to stay focused on the mission, on the vision.
Yeah, Malik, if I may, you mentioned, just to piggyback on both Dr. Tyler and Cecil's comments, you mentioned sustainability, right? Mm-hmm. And, I just want to share that, when we first pulled together, it's not like we had this grandiose idea, had this sense of like, let's make sure we do this, and had all these goals and all these metrics set up. As Cecil mentioned, we ended up developing an action plan. But before then, it was just, let's come together and let's do something, and we'll figure it out. Like you said, build it and they will come. And we just said, let's do something. And that just started to gain traction. We made a decision early on, even if it's just you and I, we're going to keep coming together.
Yes.
And more people just started to join the cause, right? And as more people started to join the cause, and again, I mentioned Robert Sines because he's been just a great support, advocate, champion, mentor. I mean, so many things we could say about him. He was able to see what was happening here locally and start to spread the word, to others through his network. And one of which we're incredibly grateful for, maybe Cecil can speak to it a little more than I can, but it got the attention of the Walter S. Johnson Foundation, right? And so we ended up getting connected. Cecil kind of helped, marinate that relationship, so to speak, and got connected. And Yali Lindcroft came to literally see what we were doing. And, you know, sometimes, Malik, when you're there in the thick of it, you don't see what's happening because we're doing the work, right? Mm-hmm. But I think she came and she saw, and I hope this doesn't come across as, you know, egotistical or arrogant or anything, but she came and saw the great stuff that was happening. I like to put it as, you know, I have kids and I see them every day and I know they're growing, but I don't see it. But if you saw them when they were 2, and then you show up 3 years later, see they're 5, you're going to be like, that's grown so much. That was the impact that it had on me for Yali coming to see. You guys are doing great stuff. You guys are doing phenomenal stuff. It's grassroots. It's look at who's here. And then she had committed to $100K that first year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll turn it over to you, Cecil, because I know you can speak to a lot more or a lot better than I can.
Yeah. So sometimes to Dr. Villalobos' point, you don't know if you're making good music, right? Until somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, can you play that again? And that's exactly what happened with the Walter S. Johnson Foundation. They actually seed sowed $100,000 in this work, and being good stewards over what was awarded to us, we nurtured, cultivated, fertilized, and then the governor's office caught wind of what we were doing, and the governor's office awarded us $500,000. When Walter S. Johnson learned that we attracted $500,000, she says, I'm not the only funder. You made good on this seed that I sowed. Walter S. Johnson then came back with the second round of funding of $400,000. So total $500,000 in flexible dollars. Now we're able to take the non-traditional, non-federal funding, braid it with the federal funding, and meet young people right where they are. And again, if I may, just to carry on from there, that was then shared with Jobs First NYC. They caught wind of what we were doing here in Southern Nevada, and they tapped us on the shoulder and said, hey, we have $50,000 in a planning grant that we would like to award for you guys to just have a discussion around creating a local intermediary. So to your point, you know, build it, they will come. But for us, it was just, you know, do the work, and everything else will organically take shape.
I mean, it's a great example. You know, that often they talk about how success is where preparation and opportunity meet. In this case, it was investment, impact, and intention coming together to have this effort or momentum underway in our community.
I love it. I love it. I think it's important, you know, what you all have been sharing, and in particular, just to emphasize, I know a lot of people listening and watching are probably very familiar with the workforce system and how it's funded and the federal and state funding that goes into it. And so knowing that this initiative that is building steam in Southern Nevada is being done, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is being done without WIOA dollars.
Yeah, Malik, no, great point. I would say yes, in the sense of a lot of what's been initiated has been through these philanthropic partners, right? These philanthropic investors. Right? Walter S. Johnson and Jobs First New York City. And so they have really, they planted the seed, right? And then as Cecil mentioned, our governor's office, the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation, the State Workforce Agency, saw that and invested as well. And so, you know, and what we've done from a workforce board standpoint is we've looked at how we can leverage our WIOA Title I fund, youth funds in particular, to complement, I should say. You know, so it's not like it's just driven by one funding bucket. It's how do we get this funding bucket to work together? Kind of same concept as with the coalition. We're not trying to compete it with each other, do one thing with this funding, do another thing with that funding. How does it, what's the synergy with the funding? What's the synergy with the partners in the coalition? And, you know, we're figuring that stuff out. That's the fun part about it. You know, I think there's a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, and, you know, really trying to do it in a way that's also, again, I'll mention this beyond WIOA, because we have the Department of Health and Human Services involved, Department of Welfare and Supportive Services. So there's all this funding out there. And it's how do we get it all working together for the sole purpose of, disrupting the pipeline and connecting our young men and women, 16 to 24, that are not working, not in school, back to education if that's what they need, and back and to employment if that's what they need. So, that's what's happening.
Outstanding. Well, I love hearing this. I love the whole concept of field of dreams, build it, they will come. Sounds like build it and the money will come. I'm curious to know, just for the sake of those people who are listening and thinking, oh, that sounds great, but I don't know if we could do that where I am. What kind of challenges have you faced? If you all can talk about a little bit, and I'm going to throw this one to Dr. V. What kind of challenges have you faced, and what have you done to overcome those?
Yeah. Look, I don't want to say that our challenge is, a need for more money. I mean, that's not really our challenge. Obviously we, great partners, great people, great possibilities, right? So I don't want to say that, but specifically, I'll say from me is one of the things as this coalition started to build, we really wanted to make sure we were capturing the narrative quantitatively, right, and qualitatively. Qualitatively, we come together at these convenings, we hear the great work that's happening. I mean, that's the most exciting part of these convenings is what are partners doing in this space, and these success stories are shared. Again, the theme isn't, oh, we need to do this. The theme is we're already doing it. Let's talk about it together, right? And so one of the things that we were challenged with, though, was how do we capture the quantitative data? How do we tell the story with numbers, right? And so it's funny because we were just barely getting started. And so it literally started manually. I had an Excel spreadsheet. Tiffany, how many youth have you done, this or that with? And then Cecil, how about yourself? And, literally going to organizations asking, what have you done? Hoping that we capture the data. So we were working with whatever was provided, right, to capture that data. And so that was a challenge right up front. How do we capture the collective impact and build that narrative together? And so we recognized early on, we need to get a platform that kind of unifies the collection of this quantitative data because, you have your own system with where you're at. Dr. Tyler has her own system. Cecil has his own. I have my own. And, there's data sharing agreements that take forever to get done. There's, all kinds of stuff. And so we just knew that we needed to get a platform. And so we had talked about the platform by about 9 months, I think, it's coming every convening. And then finally, thanks to the Waltress Johnson Foundation, they said, why don't you guys use the funding to get this platform? And so it allows us to get this platform that, there's going to be a ramp up time to build it. And so we're going to use this platform, and everybody's committed to getting on it, using it, and capturing our story, both qualitatively and quantitatively, so that we can get past that challenge of trying to coalesce all this great stuff that's happening manually. Now we have a shared platform and using that and making sure that there's no duplication of services. The challenge is going to be people feeling like dual data entry, right? So that's going to be a challenge. But again, if you believe, right, if you believe that it's important to capture the great work you're doing, and it means also getting it in this platform, it's going to happen. And I'm telling you, when this thing gets ramped up and we get to the scale with all our coalition partners adding their data into it, and I can go into all the nuances of what it's going to allow us to do, but I think the bottom line, it's going to allow us to capture our collective data and to start sharing the phenomenal stuff that's already happening and going to continue to happen in our community. But that was a challenge, I'd say. So
I would also say that that we had to challenge ourselves to evaluate what we understood of the issue by centering youth voice, centering their lived experience. We also had to challenge ourselves to examine the impact of our existing practices, whether it was what the federal mandates were or how we had typically talked about what it was to provide those 10, mandated services through WIOA, but also challenge ourselves to re-envision how we were working together. And so you talked about the silo practice or the challenge of overcoming what may feel like dual data entry. But if we are really about sharing vision and having collective impact. Part of the challenge is getting uncomfortable by trying some of these innovations that are resulting in the work. So I would say one of the significant challenges is challenging what you think you know and should do about an issue like this.
All right.
So two things come to mind for me, challenges that are constant. One is constantly assessing, where we are in the work and who's in the room. Do we have the right people, the right system partners in the room, the right private partners in the room? And so constantly assessing, evaluating, and looking to scale to make sure that we meet the needs of our young people. And then the second is when you have new members or new visitors come into the room, you have over 60 people in this room. And so for some businesses, all they see is dollar signs. And so I've had a few uncomfortable conversations in the back office and explain to individuals that this is about leveraging resources, not, selling something. Don't put your sales hat on. Come and see what you can offer, whether if it's in kind of your time or leveraging some of the offerings that your business has to help disrupt this pipeline. So for me, those are the two challenges that come to mind in this work.
Okay.
Look,
Yeah.
if I may, I want to mention two other things because it was sparked by, I think, what Tiffany and Cecil shared here. Cecil alluded to it earlier. One is not getting distracted by the shiny stuff, right? Like, yeah, there's a lot of possible, different, rabbit holes we can go down with this effort, but we are constantly reminded that our sole purpose of this coalition is disrupting the disconnected youth pipeline. So shiny stuff can be attractive. I think that's going to be a challenge for us as this thing continues to grow. And as the shiny stuff looks like, oh, really good. And, maybe it fits this way or that way. But a challenge for us is staying focused and being able to say no when it's not about the sole purpose of connecting our young men and women. Like, we will have the hard conversation. Cecil's a scary guy, so we let him be the no guy, right? But one of the best hearted guys I know. I'm obviously joking, but we're going to continue to have to say no, maybe to what might seem like a great opportunity if it's not aligned with the sole purpose of, connecting our youth. I think the second thing is, Tiffany had mentioned making sure that the youth voice is at the table, right? Because, I'm a few decades removed from that age range.
A few.
Tiffany, not much, but,
Even
so
more so.
yeah. But it's just making sure that we have the youth voice at the center. So one of the things we were able to do to make sure that was happening, because we'd sit here and we'd, have these theories and have these ideas. And, I refer often, I have 2 kids in that age range, so here's my perspective, But one of the things that we were able to do, again, thanks to the funding, right, the philanthropic funding, we were able to bring on some consultants, one whose purpose was to go and get that youth voice.
Yeah.
And so they started listening sessions, right, with various subpopulations in that group, right? I mean, they've done some with, I believe, adjudicated youth, some with JAG, participants. JAG is that Jobs for America's Graduates program that's, nationwide. I know they've also done it with the LGBTQ plus community. So really trying to get a diverse perspective of the youth that are represented in this disconnection rate. And so I think a challenge is just making sure that we don't think we know what's best for that generation.
Yes.
Let them tell us what's best for them.
If I could, Dr. V, just a quick blurb too, is really getting businesses today to look at look at themselves with a keen eye, because the way we hired 20 years ago, 40 years ago, we cannot do business that way going forward.
Right.
You may not get a polished product. Maybe businesses need to create a concierge service or an in-house mentorship program to help develop. But the boardroom and just the way we do business, we have to think of things differently. So getting employers to really open their doors and grant opportunities to young adults, maybe traditional college education isn't the way. Maybe it's micro-credentials. Maybe internally there's programs that can be created in businesses to allow that 18, 19, 20-year-old to walk in the door, get a start. And if they do decide to further their education, maybe there's a stipend or a reimbursement program, right, to encourage, opposed to the traditional allowing our young adults to carry this $150,000 college tuition throughout their journey. So really getting employers to look at things differently on recruitment efforts and retention strategies, it will be key critical too, and is also a challenge.
Absolutely.
I love it. And I think that's actually kind of leading into the next question I want to ask again to all of you. You've talked a lot about what the state of things is and how you're doing the work currently. I want you to kind of project yourself into the future a little bit and tell me a little bit about what things look like down the road for you, whether that's 6 months, a year, 5 years from now. What do you see as the future of this work?
I'm an optimist, and I'm gonna blame it on my youth. I'm gonna jump in.
Okay.
I was at dinner last week with one of our funders, investors, because at that dinner, she taught me that a funder is a one and done. Cecil, you want investors. Investors come back. And so I'll correct myself. I was at dinner with an investor, and, you know, we were talking about some of the operational strategies as we go forward to, as Dr. Tiffany Tyler-Garner would say, a call to action. But I was unpacking some of the operational strategies for the next 6 months to a year. But in that conversation, Malik, I shared with her that if we continue on this path where we're at and continue building momentum and continue to gain the traction that we've done in just the first 2 years, I made a bold prediction that we'll be serving upwards of 15,000 youth every single year. Remember, our goal was 21,000 for 5 years. But if we stay on this track, this trajectory that we're on, we'll be serving north of 15,000 young people by 2028 every single year.
You heard it here first. All right.
Absolutely.
I know it's bold.
Yeah,
But exciting.
that's right.
And along those lines, I'm also encouraged by the possibilities that will result from the learning that happens as we continue to undertake this journey together. I think it's an opportunity to innovate or elevate what I call the P's of the work, like looking at the policy, programs, practices, processes, the pennies, to make sure that we're really moving the needle in ways that are meaningful for the individuals who are experiencing this challenge. And so whether it's the ways in which we can transform the system through policy, or asking each meeting, each stakeholder to look at their practice and ask themselves, is it having the impact they hope to have? I'm excited about the ways in which we are learning together, and we'll be able to transform the ecosystem because we can finally get to a level of detail and understanding around not only how we're moving the needle, because we're now capturing that data in one place, but also how we might further integrate the services across the system. So we're not sending folks to 22 doors when they could have just walked through one and got all 22 services. And so I'm excited about those possibilities.
Malik, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to say because you have bold, you have analytical, and I'll leave it up to you to choose the one worder for me, right? So 3 things, Malik, in my mind. One is that we become incredibly not only effective, and to me, I define that by saying effective in our connections and reconnections with youth, right? But also effective in those connections, but effective relationally, even with the coalition partners.
Yes.
That there's a real trust amongst each other, a real collaboration that, and again, plays out, for example, hey, I don't need to take the lead on this particular, funding opportunity, this grant. You take the lead and I'll support you, right? Or a few of us get together and do that. So that's what I mean by when I say effective. When I say also efficient, I'm talking about, the P's that Dr. Tyler mentioned, that our policies, that our practices, that our programming, you said pennies, right? Our interventions, right? I mean, how we do the work for the young men and women, with the young women becomes very efficient. And I say that to impact the current cohort of disconnected youth, that current cohort that launched our least favorite number in this community, that 42,500, that launched this whole thing. That this whole journey's been about. So that's number one. I think number two, what I envision is that we have some very robust strategies with our school district, which the foundation's already there. Great, superintendent that's at the table. Cecil's, doing a great, incredible job establishing that, maintaining that particular relationship, because we know the school district's going to be critical in helping us figure out how we can disrupt that pipeline. Because 42,000 we may come back, so many years from now and say it's still 42,500 in Southern Nevada. Well, what happened, guys? I thought you guys were doing something. Oh yeah, we made an impact, on the 21,000. But if we're not disrupting that pipeline that's feeding, it is going to continue to be 42,000 or possibly more, maybe a little less. But it'll appear that we're not having impact. So what I envision is that, yes, we're making an impact on the current cohort, but that pipeline feeding that disconnection rate is getting lesser and lesser because there's great synergy, great practices taking place with our local school district and other partners as well in the space. And number three is that we have legislative support, and specifically, and I'm going to say this, that we have funding that is recurring year after year, to support the work with disconnected youth. I mean, what I would like is that, maybe a decade from now, we say we don't need any more state funding or state, allocation because we don't have this issue with disconnected youth anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So what I envision is submitting, I know for the state of Nevada, a bill draft resolution, basically, being able to have this as a priority across the state. It's biggest for us, in Southern Nevada. Obviously we're 75% of the state's population, give or take, here in Las Vegas and Clark County in particular. So if we were able to have a recurring state allocation that gets us focused around the disconnected youth, you said 5 years from now, that it would be awesome to have that we're into at least the third, the second or third year of that funding, and that we see that continuing. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for painting a picture of where this can go. And I believe it will go.
That's right.
If we were in the live session right now, we would pause and take some questions about the things that you've heard now. So for those of you who are viewing the video, I do want to encourage you to reach out to us with your questions after the fact. I know that NAWDB will be sharing the recordings and sharing the slides. And at the very end of this presentation is contact information for the four of us here. So if you have anything that you heard and it prompted something and you couldn't ask it right now, please feel free to reach out and just contact us and let us know what questions you have. We do have a little bit more I want to get back into before we wrap up and bring it back around to the big picture. And we heard a little bit up top about the data that sort of kicked off this initiative. Can you talk a little bit more, Dr. V, about the big picture in terms of the impact of the work you're doing and what the why is here?
Yeah, great question, Malik. Obviously, I think what we've tried to share, or at least let come out organically, is our individual whys, right? And which I think is important. That's what keeps our fuel, our fire burning, right, in this work. But we also recognize that the big picture perspective, the why behind doing this, first and foremost, it's because of if it impacts a young man or young woman, it'll change the trajectory of their lives. 2 testimonies right here, right? If it changes their lives, it's going to change their family's lives. If it changes the family's life, it's going to change the community's life. If it changes the community's life, it's going to change the region's life, right? But even bigger than that is so we had a study. It's called the Empower MPWR that was funded by a state agency here, the Office of Workforce Innovation, OWIN, we refer to it as. They funded a research study. And again, we were able to bring in a bright mind, one of the consultants, to really kind of take the lead on this work. And, we served as research assistants. And the study was an economic benefits analysis study. And it was statewide. So I want to clarify that if we were to connect 30,000 disconnected youth statewide in the next 6 years, by 2030, it would have an economic benefit of $4 billion. And that's billion with the B. And what's that mean specifically, Malik? That means a part of that, what makes that up is sales tax revenue. They get a job, they're going to start contributing sales tax, right? It saves, I'm going to put it this way, it lessens and minimizes the costs for the juvenile system, right? Homelessness, right? Foster care, right? All the things that public assistance. I mean, I can go on and on. So the idea, the simplest way I look at it, Malik, is like this. We're either going to pay $4 billion, for these particular needs in our area over the next 6 years. Or if we start connecting our young men and women, our young Tiffany's, our young Cecils, young Ricardos, young Maliks, we're going to be able to give to the economy $4 billion. So when you look at it from an economic, perspective, doing the work has a significantly huge impact on our economy, on our local area. But I want to be clear, more importantly, the economic impact and opportunity it provides to our young men and women in this community.
Dr. V, I was reading a study done by the Harvard Business Review, and they're estimating that between now and 2030, all baby boomers will have retired. And they are measuring that every 8 seconds, a boomer is retiring. We must be radical in this work just to offset what's coming. It's bad enough you're going to lose the historical knowledge,
right? But
we need to backfill all those that are going to be retiring between now and 2030.
Absolutely. And I just want to underscore the power of this paradigm shift, this notion of how do we empower so that they can become investors in their future. As I think about even our recent discussions around inflation or the cost of living, much of our approaches have been about how do we reduce the cost. Our alternative is how do we empower through their skills for them to afford more. And so this work is really about how do we capitalize on the fact that there is great untapped potential that has yet to enter into our workforce and contribute to our economy, because we are taking these deficit approaches of, well, maybe I could just make housing cost less, as opposed to empower someone to be a homeowner because they are able to earn more. And so not only is there the economic potential, the more than $4 billion that you talked about, there's also the ways in which we can end generational poverty. We can overcome situational poverty, which we're finding folks being pushed down into generational poverty because we aren't thinking through how we skill up to overcome that financial divide. There's ways in which we can foster a moral imperative that says everyone should have not only the opportunity to leverage their abilities to provide for themselves and strengthen our community, but also that we should even get to a place where we're taking folks beyond just handing them fish to not only fishing, but owning the lake or the boats out there as a part of that process. And so the opportunity here is not only the $4 billion, but the ways in which we create a new ethos in our community by rooting this work in one that says there are more than 42,000 individuals, 6 in 10 of them that have already graduated, that need someone to ensure that they are supported to skill up, reskill when needed, advance, and even get to a place where they're doing the hiring. Let's not miss out on that opportunity another year or decade in the ways that we have as a community.
Too, and reminding young people, don't despise small beginnings.
Yes.
A lot of our youth want to come out and right out of high school, right out of college and make six figures. That's not always reality. You know, in the times that we're in, social media makes it so sensational. Instant gratification. I remind young people, don't despise small beginnings. There's nothing wrong with working at Panda. And when you see Mr. Fielder, put a little extra orange chicken on my plate. Because those skills are still transferable.
Mm-hmm.
You're learning customer service, how to problem solve. Those skills are transferable to your next. So don't despise small beginnings. We all started somewhere.
Yes. Target.
McDonald's. Okay. I hear you.
That's so important.
All right. I love it. Thank you. And I don't want to cut you off. We are getting towards the end of our time here, but I want to give you, if you would like, 30 seconds to just final thoughts for each of you.
I think I just shared mine. Don't despise small beginnings.
There is a why in this for each of us, every system partner and every organization. Where there's the social argument or the economic one, if we peel back the layers, there's a role that we each must play in ensuring that we realize the potential in our community.
I would say that surround yourself with champions. You know, not and I want to be very clear here, Malik. Not just people who are doing youth work. Right? There's a lot of great people doing youth work. I'm talking about find your Tiffany's, find your Cecils, find your Maliks, find champions, surround yourself with them. And I say that because whether it's just Tiffany and I showing up, we're going to keep showing up. If it was our 9th convening and if it was just Tiffany and I, it's just Tiffany and I. But another champion. And I wish we could have the 40 champions that are gathering champions, Malik, not just people doing youth work. So I would say surround yourself with champions. And I believe that's where it starts.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing about the work that you're doing, about the intention behind what you're doing here in Southern Nevada to disrupt the disconnected youth pipeline. To our audience, our panelists today have shared a lot about their why. They've talked about the actions that they're taking and that are happening here in Southern Nevada. So I want to leave on a bit of a challenge. Take a moment now and reflect on what your why might be. Think about that initial question I asked. Do you know how many disconnected youth there are in your area? And if you don't know, go find out. And once you find out, ask yourself, what is it you're going to do about that? And so I encourage you to take a moment now as this presentation is closing out and before you move on to the next thing, take a moment and just write down one thing that you're going to do. Maybe you're going to call your version of Dr. Tiffany Tyler-Garner so that you know you have the right person sitting next to you. Maybe it's just that you're going to find out what's already happening in your area, but do one thing to move on this. Take some action. Once again, just want to remind everyone that our contact information is available in the presentation. We do look forward to hearing from you with your questions, your comments, your feedback. And we thank you again for your attentiveness. I want to thank again our panelists, Dr. Ricardo Villalobos, Dr. Tiffany Tyler-Garner, and Mr. Cecil Fielder. Thank you all once again. And thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Malik. Thank you.
Thank you.